Hello, and welcome back to Savage, Harvest, and Heal. Look closely at this container garden because the problem is not simply that these tomato plants look ugly. Yellowing leaves, weak stems, curling foliage, sparse growth, and fruit struggling on stressed plants are signals from a system that has gone out of balance. The containers may be sitting in good sunlight. The plants may have been watered regularly, and yet the harvest can still collapse. Today, we are going to break down 4 container gardening mistakes that can turn a promising setup into exactly what you see here, and more importantly, how to diagnose and correct each one before your next crop reaches this stage. The first mistake is treating a container like a small version of open ground. It is not. A container is a restricted root environment with limited volume, limited buffering capacity, and a rapidly changing temperature and moisture profile. In a garden bed, roots can explore horizontally and vertically, moving away from a dry patch, finding moisture, and accessing nutrients from a much larger soil reservoir. In a fabric grow bag or pot, the root system eventually encounters a physical boundary. That changes everything about irrigation, fertility, oxygen availability, and temperature management. Tomatoes are especially demanding because they build substantial above-ground biomass and can produce a heavy fruit load. Their root system needs enough volume to support that growth. When a large tomato is placed in a small container, the plant can initially look fine because the seedling carries stored energy and has a relatively small canopy. As leaves expand and fruiting begins, demand rises sharply. The limited root zone can no longer supply water and nutrients quickly enough. The plant responds by reducing growth, yellowing older foliage, shedding flowers, curling leaves, or producing small, poor-quality fruit. The practical correction is to size the container according to the mature plant, not the seedling. For a vigorous, indeterminate tomato, a large container is generally much safer than a small, decorative pot. Think in terms of root volume, not merely diameter. A deep, broad container or a properly sized fabric grow bag gives roots more room and reduces how violently moisture and nutrient concentrations fluctuate. If you are growing compact determinate varieties, you can work with less volume, but you still need enough medium to prevent rapid drying during hot weather. There's another mechanical issue hidden in the image. Container geometry controls drainage. A pot can have drainage holes and still have a poorly functioning root zone. If the growing medium is dense, fine, or composed largely of ordinary garden soil, water can move slowly through it. The lower portion may remain saturated while the upper portion appears dry. Roots need both water and oxygen. They cannot perform normal respiration when air-filled pore space remains chronically flooded. A useful diagnostic method is simple. Push a finger into the medium, but do not stop at the surface. Feel several centimeters below the top and inspect the drainage behavior after irrigation. Water should move through the root zone rather than sitting on top or taking an extremely long time to drain. If the container stays saturated for days, improve the physical structure at the next repotting rather than merely reducing fertilizer. A well-structured container medium should hold moisture while maintaining macropores for oxygen and drainage. The second mistake is inconsistent watering. Container plants do not experience moisture the same way plants in the ground do. A large bed can remain moderately stable for days, while a container exposed to sun and wind can move from adequately moist to severely dry within a surprisingly short period. Fabric containers can dry even faster because air reaches the sides and increases evaporation. During hot weather, a mature tomato can remove a remarkable amount of water through transpiration. The problem is not that the gardener misses one watering. Repeated cycles of severe drying followed by heavy soaking create physiological stress. Fine roots can lose function when the medium becomes excessively dry. Then, when water suddenly returns, the plant has to restore its water status while damaged or stressed roots struggle to keep up. During flowering and fruit development, these fluctuations can also contribute to blossom drop and irregular fruit development. Instead of watering according to a fixed calendar, learn to read the container. Check the moisture several centimeters below the surface, lift smaller pots when possible, and observe how quickly the medium drains. Then water thoroughly enough to moisten the entire root zone, allowing excess water to escape through the drainage holes. Do not keep adding tiny amounts every few hours unless your growing system specifically requires that strategy. Frequent shallow watering can encourage a shallow, moisture-dependent root distribution. But thorough watering does not mean drowning the plant. The objective is to recharge the root zone and then allow appropriate air exchange as excess water drains away. In very hot conditions, you may need to water more often because evaporation and transpiration increase. In cooler or cloudy conditions, the same schedule could keep the medium unnecessarily wet. Weather, container size, plant size, wind exposure, and growth stage all change water demand. The third mistake is nutrient imbalance. The yellow leaves shown here could tempt a gardener to reach immediately for a strong fertilizer, but yellowing is a symptom, not a diagnosis. Nitrogen deficiency can cause older leaves to become uniformly pale because nitrogen is mobile inside the plant and is relocated toward younger tissues. However, yellowing can also result from root damage, poor drainage, incorrect pH, excessive salts, magnesium deficiency, disease, or simply severe stress. This distinction matters because adding fertilizer to a damaged root system can make the problem worse. Container media have limited buffering capacity. If soluble nutrients accumulate, electrical conductivity rises around the roots. High salt concentration makes it harder for roots to take up water, creating a condition called osmotic stress. The plant can wilt even while the medium contains plenty of moisture. A better approach is to diagnose before feeding. Look at the pattern of chlorosis. Are the oldest leaves affected first, or are the newest leaves pale? Is the yellowing uniform, or does it appear between green veins? Are roots burned? Are roots healthy and light-colored, or brown, mushy, and foul-smelling? Has fertilizer been applied repeatedly? Is the medium drying normally? These observations help separate nutrition problems from root zone problems. Tomatoes also need more than nitrogen. They require nitrogen for vegetative growth, phosphorus for energy transfer and reproductive development, potassium for water regulation and enzyme activity, calcium for cell wall formation, magnesium as a central component of chlorophyll, sulfur, and a range of micronutrients. A balanced, crop-appropriate fertilizer is generally safer than repeatedly applying one nutrient based on a single visual symptom. Fertilizer concentration also matters. More is not automatically better. Follow the product's dilution instructions and consider the existing nutrient content of your potting medium. If a medium already contains controlled-release fertilizer, adding concentrated liquid feed too frequently can create excess salts. If you suspect salt accumulation, thorough watering with clean water can sometimes help leach soluble salts, provided the container has excellent drainage and the plant is not already suffering from severe root damage. The fourth mistake is ignoring pests, disease, and environmental stress until the plant is visibly collapsing. The image shows distressed tomato foliage, but visual symptoms alone cannot tell you whether the original problem was nutritional, microbial, insect-related, environmental, or a combination. Container plants under stress become easier targets because weakened tissues and reduced vigor can limit their ability to tolerate additional pressure. Start inspections on the underside of leaves. Aphids can cluster around tender growth. Whiteflies may flutter when foliage is disturbed. Spider mites can cause fine stippling, bronzing, and sometimes webbing, particularly during hot, dry conditions. Tomato hornworms can remove extraordinary amounts of foliage surprisingly quickly. Thrips can scar young tissue and flowers. Do not spray blindly. Identify the organism and choose the least disruptive control that matches the problem. Disease diagnosis also requires pattern recognition. Fungal and bacterial pathogens can produce spots, lesions, blights, and wilting, while vascular diseases can cause progressive yellowing and collapse. Water sitting on foliage for long periods can favor certain diseases, especially when combined with poor air circulation. Watering the root zone rather than repeatedly wetting leaves can reduce unnecessary leaf wetness. Remove severely diseased material when appropriate. Sanitize tools. Avoid handling plants while foliage is wet, and do not compost diseased tissue if your composting system cannot reliably destroy the pathogen. There is another issue that container gardeners frequently overlook: sunlight and heat. Tomatoes need strong light, but roots can become excessively hot inside dark containers exposed to intense afternoon sun. A black fabric pot or dark plastic container can absorb substantial solar radiation. The canopy may be thriving, while the root zone is overheating. Elevated root temperatures can reduce root function and increase water demand at exactly the moment the container is drying fastest. Position containers where the foliage receives sufficient direct light while the container itself is protected from extreme heat when necessary. Grouping pots can reduce wind exposure, but do not pack them so tightly that air circulation disappears. Use a light-colored outer container, shade the sides, or place fabric pots where the root zone receives less direct afternoon radiation if temperatures are extreme. Avoid placing containers directly against heat-reflecting walls without considering the combined temperature effect. Pruning is another area where gardeners can accidentally worsen stress. Tomatoes can tolerate pruning, but aggressive removal of foliage reduces the plant's photosynthetic surface. Leaves are the solar panels of the plant. They manufacture carbohydrates that support roots, stems, flowers, and fruit. Removing too much healthy foliage during hot weather can expose fruit to intense sunlight and increase water stress. Remove damaged, diseased, or strategically unnecessary growth rather than stripping the plant bare. Support matters too. A heavily loaded tomato plant has considerable mechanical demand on its stems. Wind, fruit weight, and repeated movement can cause bending or breakage. Use a stake, cage, trellis, or other support system appropriate to the variety before the plant becomes difficult to train. Supporting the canopy also improves spacing and can increase airflow through the foliage, which helps create a less favorable environment for some diseases. Now let us turn this failed-looking container garden into a recovery protocol. First, stop guessing. Examine the root zone, foliage, drainage, recent weather, watering history, and fertilizer history. Write down what you find. Gardening becomes far easier when symptoms are treated as evidence rather than as instructions to immediately apply a product. Second, stabilize water. If the medium is bone dry, rehydrate it gradually if necessary so water can penetrate instead of racing through dry channels. If it is saturated, stop watering and improve drainage and evaporation conditions. Do not fertilize a severely wilted or waterlogged plant until the immediate root zone problem is understood. Third, inspect the roots if the plant is declining rapidly. Healthy roots are usually firm and functional, while severely decayed roots may be brown, soft, or unpleasant smelling. If a container is badly root-bound, the root mass may appear densely packed, with roots circling the container wall. In that case, moving the plant into an appropriately larger container can restore access to fresh medium, provided the plant is healthy enough to tolerate transplanting. Fourth, correct nutrition carefully. Remove dead foliage so you can see new growth clearly, then monitor the plant's response after improving moisture and root conditions. If a nutrient deficiency is supported by symptoms and growing conditions, apply an appropriate fertilizer at a measured rate. Do not stack multiple fertilizers, foliar feeds, compost teas, mineral amendments, and homemade extracts all at once. When everything changes simultaneously, you lose the ability to determine what actually worked. For future containers, build the system before the plant goes in. Choose a quality potting medium with stable organic matter, adequate water holding capacity, and enough structural porosity. Do not simply scoop soil from the garden into a pot and expect it to behave the same way. Garden soil can compact inside containers, reducing drainage and oxygen diffusion. A container medium should be engineered for confined root growth. Then choose a container that matches the crop's mature size. Install drainage holes that cannot easily become blocked. Elevate containers slightly where appropriate so water can escape. Keep a consistent irrigation routine based on actual moisture conditions. Fertilize according to plant demand rather than fear. Inspect leaves regularly. Rotate containers only when it benefits light distribution and does not damage the canopy. Record what you plant, when you feed it, how often you water, and how it responds. The most important lesson from this image is that a failing container garden is rarely caused by one mysterious mistake. It is usually a chain reaction. A small container dries quickly. The gardener waters heavily. Poor structure keeps the lower root zone wet. Roots lose oxygen. Nutrient uptake becomes erratic. The gardener sees yellow leaves and adds fertilizer. Salt concentration rises. The plant becomes even more stressed. Pests or disease then take advantage of weakened growth. By the time the leaves look terrible, the original mistake may be several steps behind the visible symptom. Break that chain early. Give roots enough space. Give them oxygen. Manage moisture consistently. Feed according to evidence. Protect the plant from unnecessary heat and mechanical stress. Inspect for insects and disease before symptoms become severe. And remember that a container is not just a pot holding soil. It is a miniature ecosystem whose physical, chemical, and biological conditions must remain balanced. So, if your tomatoes currently resemble the struggling plants in this image, do not automatically throw them away. Some damaged leaves may never recover, but the plant can produce healthy new growth if the root system remains viable and the underlying stress is corrected. Remove only what is clearly dead or diseased. Stabilize the environment, and watch the newest growth. New leaves are often the best report card you have. And if you are starting a container garden from scratch, make the biggest investment in the things nobody notices in a thumbnail: root volume, drainage, medium structure, reliable water management, and measured nutrition. Those invisible foundations determine whether the beautiful harvest appears later. The goal is not simply to keep a tomato plant alive in a container. The goal is to create a root environment where the plant can continuously exchange water, oxygen, minerals, and carbohydrates while supporting vigorous growth and fruit production. Here at Savage Harvest and Heal, we are not interested in gardening that only looks good for a week. We want systems that keep producing, recover intelligently, waste fewer inputs, and become easier to manage over time. So before you water that struggling container again, pause and investigate. Check the roots, check the moisture, check the drainage, check the leaves, and check your feeding history. The plant is already giving you the clues, you just need to read them. If this breakdown helped you understand why container gardens fail, stay with us for more practical gardening strategies that turn small spaces into productive growing systems. Subscribe to Savage Harvest and Heal, because the healthiest harvest starts long before the fruit reaches your table. And remember, when a container garden fails, do not just treat the leaves, fix the system beneath them.